Good morning, everyone. Okay, hold on. Try it one more time. Good morning, everyone. All right, so now I know you're ready to go. We are about to start session 6 of our Color, Class, and Colonialism conference. And so I invite you to sit back, relax, listen attentively, because y'all are so great with the questions. And I am sure this morning, as Dr. Ian Bethel Bennett moderates for us this morning, that you will even get more information than we've already had with the presenters today. So welcome this morning, and we're about to start session 6.
See, she was much better than I am. I apologize humbly for having this ugly face up here again today. We're just waiting for our first presenter to be ready. She's coming in from Siberia somewhere. You want to, yeah? Good, she's ready. So our first presenter is Ms. Makeda Sergiu, and she's a student at the University of the Bahamas. Her passion is for marine science, and that has motivated her to pursue a degree in small island sustainability at UB. She developed a new appreciation for Spanish, que pena, at the university, leading her to pursue a minor in Spanish, which is great. The language has allowed Makeda to participate in social science research and opportunity regarding the colorism in the Bahamas, a subject she will speak about today, because colorism is not real. It's a fiction, as Natina will tell you. Exploring the concept of colorism from the perspective of Afro-Hispanic Latino studies in the Bahamas. So welcome, Makeda. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the introduction. So without further ado, we can move into the topic. So just a little preface. This topic was chosen because I wanted to learn more about colorism in the Bahamas from both ends of the spectrum. And it was a result of a Spanish class for my minor. And it was under the guidance of my professor, who is in here right now, Dr. Jesus Mesa Morales. Okay, so first we're going to start with acknowledgements, then we're going to move into introduction, methodology, results, discussions, references, and questions at the end. Okay, so these are just acknowledgements. As I said before, my professor guided me and helped me to formulate this topic and this whole project. And I also utilized some of the former work done by another student by the name of Alexandra St. Albert. So let's begin. So as we all may already know, colorism is defined as a prejudice or a bias determined by skin tone. And the phenomenon typically happens in countries where Black people are in the minority, but in the Bahamas, it's a bit different. 85% of our population are Black people, and we also have a thriving tourism industry. Why would I mention that? Well, simply because because of our tourism industry and the type of tourists that we get, it changes the perspective of how we perceive white people or lighter-skinned individuals. So most studies I found most of the studies regarding colorism negatively affects the darker skin tones, but because of the interesting case study of the Bahamas, I wanted to investigate how people who are very light-skinned individuals and how people who are really dark-skinned individuals on both opposing ends of the spectrum were affected by colorism. And because I was doing a Spanish course, I had to relate it somehow to Latin American countries, so I decided to look at how the Hispanic Caribbean countries of Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Cuba were how they have experienced colorism and tie it into my topic. So a common trend that I noticed in the Caribbean countries was that all of the native people or earlier settlers experienced harsh and inhumane treatment. In the Hispanic countries, this would be the indigenous people. And in the Bahamas and Cuba and different places where we experience African descendants, they experienced it all. It came mostly from the mistreatment of slaves. Oh, let me go back. In the Latin American countries, they had a caste system which was meant to keep the white colonizers at the top and the African slaves at the bottom. So if you will look, you would see that you have the Spaniards at the pinnacle of the square and of the triangle. Then you have the Creoles, which were the Spaniards who were born in the Americas or the Latin American countries who were kind of like governing the plantations. Then you have the mixed individuals, so the mestizos, mulattoes, and zambios were all mixed, and they were in the middle of the triangle. And then the indigenous people, and at the bottom were the Africans. So in the Bahamas, as most of us already know, Christopher Columbus discovered the Bahamas, and we were the first country to be discovered. And after he discovered this land, he unfortunately wiped out our earliest settlers. And after this, we experienced history of the British bringing in African slaves to work the land. And because of this, most of our population are of African descent. So for my study, as I said before, I wanted to investigate the different tones of colorism that exist in the Bahamas, and I compared it with the Latin American literature. And I created a survey and I distributed it online. I will not lie, most of the participants were my colleagues in classes or my friends, so the demographics are a bit young. And we're just gonna go through the trends that I found in the study. So initially I wanted to receive like 100 respondents, but my teacher was like, that's wildly unrealistic. So I was only able to get 53 respondents. Most of them were female respondents. A great majority were Bahamians. The age, as I said, was pretty young, between 18 to 31. So, yeah. And then in regards to education, most of the respondents were educated. They all had high school diploma or equivalent. 66% were in college. In regards to occupancy, most were students. The rest were lifeguards. We have the annual earnings were between $10,000 to $25,000, and most of the respondents were from New Providence, the capital. And then I asked a series of questions. One of them was if Bahamians thought that colorism exists in the Bahamas. I defined it, of course, and I asked them if they thought it exists in the Bahamas. Most of the respondents agreed yes. And then this question was derived from the previous study done by the former student. And I asked, during an election period in the Bahamas, a dark-skinned leader of a certain political party was called a black African monkey by a member of an opposing party. On a scale of 1 to 5, how acceptable is it? And you can see from the results that most of the respondents said that it was either very unacceptable or it was unacceptable, which shows that colorism, from the study, it shows that the respondents understand that colorism does exist in the Bahamas and there is a common distaste and dislike for it. Next, I said, the question was, you alongside your business partner, these are case study questions, by the way. You alongside your business partner are interviewing females for your retail store and are at a job interview. You interview a light-skinned individual with little to no qualifications. Then you interview a dark-skinned individual with academic qualifications. However, the light-skinned individual is chosen by your counterpart for the job. How likely is this to occur in the Bahamas? Again, I said on a 1 to 5 scale. And as you can see from the results, it was either very likely or likely. So this shows that colorism, from the respondents, This shows that colorism can affect your employment and these things of this nature in the Bahamas. Then, more case study questions. You are a light-skinned individual who has 5 years experience and a college degree in tourism management. You go in for an interview for a job-funded award and you get the award. You are then told by your friends that you only got the award because of your skin tone and not because of your accomplishments. How likely is this to happen in the Bahamas? As you can see from the results, it's either very likely or likely, because before I did the study, I wanted to get the perspective of different individuals, and this was something that I have been hearing, that the lighter skinned individuals felt as though if you accomplish something here in the Bahamas, they would attribute it to your skin tone, even if you have the qualifications. So I wanted to dig a bit deeper. I went on Google and I searched for a skin tone spectrum. And this was Google's Monk skin tone scale. And I asked individuals to select their skin tone best applicable. And of course, this could be a form of error for the survey, because people could have chosen a skin tone that is not realistic, but there was no way of avoiding that with an online survey. And this was the results of that. And then I asked, have you ever experienced colorism? Half of the respondents said that they had experienced colorism, but some of the responses were interesting. 3 of them reads as follows: definitely in a job interview, I was clearly either the most preferred or I'm viewed as a high candidate for payment. I'm rejected for lower paying jobs. It's not a bad experience for me, but my friends usually joke about me being white sometimes. Yes, I'm often thought to be ditzy because I am light-skinned, and called beautiful because I am light-skinned with curly hair. Then I asked, what are some names that you've been called because of your skin tone? And these are an array of harmful and just awful words that different skin tones have been called. And then I asked, over the years, there have been many papers published about the mistreatment of darker-skinned individuals. Do you think that light-skinned people experience colorism? If you do, give a brief explanation. And 74% of the respondents agreed that they do. And some of the responses were, I think they do. People can treat them as if they aren't black enough to be a part of certain black initiatives. Also, they will be passed up for opportunities if someone lighter than they are is in their competition. I think so because there are stereotypes and name-calling for people who are light-skinned. I think light-skinned people would be hated just because of their skin is lighter. Yes, because dark-skinned people have hatred for them based on personal experience and slavery. Yes, we are looked upon as sexual stigmas, and Bahamians usually see light skins as more attractive and appealing. And some of these respondents had me ready to go and do another study on the beauty standard in the Bahamas, but I didn't have time for that. But I would recommend it. And then I asked, what makes a person black in the Bahamas? And this was one of the most interesting questions when I was reviewing the data, because I really would have thought that Bahamians would have said the texture of your hair. That was what I was expecting to get from the populace, but from the respondents. But 42% of the respondents stated that it was the color of your skin. That was also expected as well. But then this one threw me off. They said 32% of the respondents said that family lineage had a part to play in determining if someone was Bahamian or not. So maybe because in a lot of the family islands we're tight-knit and you know so-and-so daughter is from this person, I don't know. But that was just a very interesting to get that perspective. So next, this is a very long survey. A lot of my colleagues were annoyed by how long it was, but I needed data. So next we had the photo ID portion where I used pictures of different mixed individuals, and then I used the control of somebody who has classic black features. So for this one, this was like a typical mulatto or mixed individual, and the question for all of the photo ID portions were, would you consider this person to be black, and what would what word would you use to racially classify this person? So 96% of the participants considered her black. They said yes, but only so you can't, yes, but only half, so you can't reap the benefits of being black if you take away opportunities from the true representation. And then another respondent said, I would consider her mixed, but not fully black, but her hair features and her facial features and hair. So this is where you start to see stuff like not fully black. One of the respondents had said half-breed and different things of this nature. So it started to get interesting from here. And then this, of course, is Michael Ealy. Next, if I was to do it again, I would choose people who are not famous because that had a bit of bias in it as well. I asked if he was considered black. They said black, light skin, evidently the offspring of at least one black parent. They said this is a black man. He is light-skinned man with a parent that has white lineage indicated by the light color of his hair and skin. His hair thickness also indicates that he's a black man. And I chose him because he has light-colored eyes, but he has thick hair, but a light-colored skin. So I wanted to see what the respondents would think. And then Rihanna, again, this had some bias in it. But I chose this picture of Rihanna because her hair is straight, which is not typical for a black person to have such straight hair. And she has colored eyes, but she has predominantly black facial features. But the responses were more so geared towards her features and her heritage. So they said, yes, she is a light-skinned person with one white grandparent. Yes, based on skin colors, family, and features. She's black. Caramel is what I call her. She most likely lightened her skin tone because of the industry that she's in and criticism. So as I said, it started to get a bit interesting. And then I included myself because I wanted to see what they would say because of the hair type, the eye color, and the skin tone. And this is when it really got interesting. Someone responded no to Conky. That one was very funny for me. Conky Joe, but black, likely to be of low percentage of black heritage, possibly a mixed white black parent and a fully white parent. She is black. I say this because I don't know her biological background. I call her light-skinned. Her hair texture isn't as loose as a mixed person's, but seems to have a light-skinned parent. Black, light-skinned, mixed, color of eyes, giving mixed feelings. So a lot of people couldn't decide. For the previous ones, the percentage was 93% said that they were black. So for me, it dropped by 3%. Okay. And then this is a typical mixed Indian person. In other countries like Trinidad and Bahamas and Jamaica, they had the history with indigenous workers, and that resulted in their population looking a bit different. So I wanted to see what Bahamians would think about this, and the percentage dropped significantly. They said 73% said that he was black, but a lot of them they couldn't identify him. Some said South Asian, some said Indian, some said Latino, and so forth. And this was my control, and 100% of participants said he was black. So that shows that, yeah, that they understood, but yes. So these are more case study questions. I don't know if I'll have time to discuss it as much, but it just goes into talking about how children are, like if you have a mixed child in the school and they looked, I guess, mixed, should they be mistreated on stuff like that? And a lot of the respondents said they would be considered black, but calling them white girl and stuff like that and red gal is not offensive. But when I did a reverse of that with a dark-skinned individual, and they agreed as well, the name calling shouldn't happen, but it is something that we need to work on as a society. And then, yeah, in regards to attractiveness, 100% of the respondents said that dark-skinned individuals were attractive, and 96% of respondents agreed that light-skinned individuals were attractive. When asked if they thought the light-skinned people were a minority and excused from being black, 84% responded yes. They said yes, the black Bahamians think that they are less of a true Bahamian just because of their skin color, and that's prejudice. Another person said yes, they make me feel like I don't fit in, I'm not black enough to share their struggles, even though I do indeed. So, yeah, this is basically the same thing. So in conclusion, it's evident that colorism does exist in the Bahamas. One of the trends that I noticed is that when we segregate ourselves based on skin tone, it can cause a lot of identity issues for dark-skinned and light-skinned individuals. And I feel as though there just needs to be more research in this topic. If I had to do another study, I would do it on attractiveness, because I do feel as though attractiveness and colorism goes hand in hand in the Bahamas. We do have a serious issue with that, and that it could go down the rabbit hole with that, but colorism does exist in the Bahamas, and I just think that there needs to be more research on it to solidify the claims. So that's it. Any questions? For the end, I'm sorry.
So our next presenter, I'll be really fast, so you don't have to look at me anymore, is Helen Clonaris, writer and transformational arts practitioner. Helen Clonaris is a Greek Bahamian writer, teacher, and energy medicine practitioner who, after living in North California for 17 years, has recently returned to her hometown of Nassau. Her early years in the Bahamas were spent working as a human rights activist, raising awareness around issues that range from capital punishment to violence against women to discrimination against GLBT Bahamians. She founded and co-founded several socially significant organizations, including the Rainbow Alliance of the Bahamas and several literary journals, collectives, and associations, including Women Speak, a journal for Caribbean women's literature and art, and the Bahamas Writers Summer Institute. In her 2017 debut collection of stories, If I Had the Wings, was published by People Tree Press and was a finalist in the 2018 Bocas Prize for Caribbean Literature. Also in 2017, Helen was awarded the International Writer in Residence at the Small Wonder Short Story Festival. In 2015, she co-edited Writing the Walls Down, a convergence of LGBTQ voices with poet Amir Rabaya. And in 2014, her short story Cowboy was shortlisted for the Commonwealth Short Story Prize. Her nonfiction and fiction have been published in numerous North American and Caribbean journals, including Transition, Calyx, So to Speak, The Caribbean Writer, Pui, Small Axe Salon, Proud Flesh, Sargasso, Anthurium, Tongues of the Ocean, Yena, and Lucayos. Her work also appears in several anthologies, including the People Tree Book of Contemporary Caribbean Short Stories. Let's Tell This Story Properly, The Haunted Topics, Caribbean Ghost Stories, Our Caribbean, A Gathering of Lesbian and Gay Writings, Caribbean Erotic, and The Racial Imaginary, Writers and the Life of the Mind. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Religious Studies from Wesleyan University. She studied with renowned Caribbean writers at the Caribbean Writers Summer Institute at the University of Miami, and received a Master of Fine Arts in Writing and Consciousness from New College of California. In addition to her writing and teaching, Helen has weaved her explorations in Jungian psychology, energy and plant medicines, and quantum and shamanic healing into the program for her personal and transformational healing and liberation. She combines her passion for the sacred, social, and ecological justice, healing, and the literary arts to create transformative experiences within the community. So I welcome Helen to... Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Bethel Bennett. Good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here with all of you. I just want to say that what I'm going to share with you is nonfiction work. It's in progress and it's in conversation with Dr. Joy Degree, author of Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, Resma Menachem, author of My Grandmother's Hands, and Barbara Brennan, author of many books, including Hands of Light. I also want to invite you to breathe during this presentation and just to notice your breath as I share. Of late, I have not been able to take in a full breath. I can't exhale deeply. My yawns are shallow. I don't know what triggered this. I know it began long before the pandemic, before I watched a video of George Floyd being suffocated by a policeman pressing his knee, his whole weight against Mr. Floyd's neck for a murderous 9 minutes. Before the first California fires, I should say that I was living in California for the last 17 years and have returned from there. Before the first California fires, the ones that leapt across a 4-lane freeway and razed towns and neighborhoods to the ground. Before I began sleeping on the couch with a bag at the door in case I had to evacuate at night. But even that doesn't fully explain it. It doesn't explain how the air becomes hard to take in. I remember listening to interviews with scientists on PBS about the dire threat of the loss of oxygen on our planet. We were losing phytoplankton in the oceans because of global warming. Trees across our planet's most ancient forests were being exterminated faster than they could grow back. We might not be able to breathe in another 25 years or so, is what they said. And in between these voices on the radio, the chilling cries of Black men across America repeat over and over, "I can't breathe." June 1973. I am 6 years old. I am lying on my back under a cherry tree in our backyard in New Providence, Bahamas. I am watching the sun stream through branches and leaves, pool honey gold between my body and the canopy overhead. I know light is angelic, heavenly. I heard that somewhere, maybe Greek Orthodox Sunday school, or saw it someplace, the oil paintings of golden-winged angels that cover the walls and ceilings of our white and blue stone church on West Hill Street. I am too young to fully comprehend the differences between heaven and earth. Breathing in the sweet scent of warm Bermuda cherries, the slightly damp grass, the dark brown soil under my body, I think this is what heaven means, this here. I do not yet know the difference between God and my body, God and this tree. The honey gold light is everywhere, everything like the love of God. It is one with my breath and luminous. I am breathing in light. I am breathing in, and I am this honey gold air. Later, when I am told God does not live in rocks and trees and honey, in the bees that make it, in the earth herself, or in my own body, I will have this to remember, this before. I will know in my cells a different story. July 1973. The Union Jack, red, blue, white, flutters in a warm breeze as it descends on its rope, brown hands pulling it firmly back to earth. In a moment, a new flag, black, yellow, turquoise, will be hoisted, its cloth catching the breeze, rippling, changing the vibration of air, changing how the sky looks to those arching their necks towards an upside-down sea of possibility. I do not yet know what colonialism means, how it works to divide bodies from each other and themselves, from their gods, from their earth, how it changes the quality of seeing, how it changes the air, its makeup, its temperature. But I am already breathing that air, and the rippling out of yellow, black, and turquoise sends waves of new perception across these limestone islands. Perhaps it is something about this subtle shift in the air that awakens me to other perceptions. I wonder, If there is no difference between God and this tree, God and my body, God and the brown earth holding me up, then why does the air move faster, molecules tighten, and white people's breathing change in the presence of black passersby on the road in front of our house? I am assuming in my 6-year-old body that God is everywhere, not just the white bodies, but the black and brown bodies of people who are passersby, next-door neighbors, the plumber who comes to install the new washing machine, the woman who cares for me and my sister when my parents are at work. But something in the air, the tightness of white people's words in the presence of black people, makes me question where God lives, troubles the way I breathe. When a person experiences trauma, the first thing they do is hold their breath. In that moment, a part of their consciousness gets stuck. A division occurs between the breathing part of themselves and the part that is stuck, holding its breath. One part goes under, like a drowning person succumbing to the underwater current. The other part, the survivor, gets pulled onto the safety of the bow of a boat, chest heaving. Now there is a perpetual split. The stuck part is always underwater, heavy, holding its breath, unable to breathe, while the conscious part goes on breathing lighter, unaware of the part of themselves that is lost to the water. That split goes on to become a chronic emotional ache that we learn to live with, a heaviness in our unconscious, and whose source is, we imagine, beyond us. Sometimes the trauma is part of this life. Oftentimes, it is the traumas of our ancestors passed down through DNA and memory in a lived over again across generations expression of the body. A movement that mimics the heaving up out of the water and the loss of the one who drowned and is exiled to the sea and tides and powdery seafloor. What that expression looks like on a body varies. A going till the knees give out. A rage that leaps across the space between two bodies and strikes down what is powerless. A child, perhaps. In dreams, we hear the waves, the sucking in of breath, the cry just before the absence of sound, the disappearance of some precious thing to the water. In nightmares, we are reminded why it would be perilous to remember. The forgotten cry, the hurt that came before. We rise, groggy, amnesiac. September 1975. In elementary school, I learned the sing-song poem, "In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. He had 3 ships and left from Spain. He sailed through sunshine, wind, and rain. October 12, their dream came true. You never saw a happier crew. Indians, Indians, Columbus cried. His heart was filled with joyful pride, but India, the land, was not. It was the Bahamas, and it was hot. He made the trip again and again, trading gold to bring to Spain the first American. No, not quite. But Columbus was brave, and he was bright." We learn about Columbus the way Christian children learn about Adam in the Garden of Eden. He is the beginning of all things. He and his story is our origin myth. We are here now in these islands because he set foot here first. And as with all creation myths, this one is the cornerstone of our worldview. My friends and I, black and brown and white children, we sing the poem to each other on the playground during lunch. So in high school years later, we experience a profound dissonance when we come to discover that the Arawak die in the water, diving for pearls. They die in the mines, searching for gold. They die from disease and murder by the Europeans who invade their islands and homes. We suffer a profound dissonance when we learn that Africans are enslaved by the millions, and those who do not die in the water are brought over to replace the disappeared Arawak among the so many other indigenous peoples of the so-called Americas. That they are beaten and tortured to generate wealth that will power up an industrial revolution across Europe for seconds, perhaps. This discovery causes us to hold our breath. In the pause, we hear the echo of he is brave and he is bright. Like a song that rises from a fissure in our memories when the psyche needs it most, in the exhale we perceive because we want to survive. It is hard to blame Columbus, hard to see the devastation, the losses, the absence as anything but progress. With Columbus as our cornerstone, we are at a loss for the words we need to explain the split that is shaping the way we think, the split that is shaping our unawareness of history, the split that is shaping the way we think about who we are, what we know, and how we feel about what we know, the split that is shaping how we see our bodies and our disconnection from them and the land we live on. The split that is shaping how we as Black and brown and white children see and know and feel about each other, and how we relate to and with each other, and our inability to imagine what exists in the absence where the Arawak who once lived here used to breathe. When societies experience a trauma, invasions, inquisitions, wars, mass torture, genocide, Holocaust, slavery, there is a collective holding of the Okay, I just want to welcome whoever it was that came in when that happened. Okay. When societies experience a trauma, let's just breathe. Invasions, inquisitions, wars, mass torture, genocide, Holocaust, slavery. There is a collective holding of the breath and the disappearance of consciousness that gets stuck in the unbreathing part of us. A fracture in the collective psyche appears, a split in our awareness, a walling off, a way of not knowing what is unbearable to know, a way of turning from the inconsolable so we can survive. For centuries before European expansion across the wide Sargasso, before the first ship set sail from Angola with its cargo of human beings bound for Virginia and the new colonial enterprise, Europeans had been waging war within their own countries and across their own borders. They conducted crusades and inquisitions, jailed and murdered people deemed outsiders and heretics, tortured and burned women and men who practiced indigenous European religions and healing traditions. They crafted tools dedicated to inflicting pain and punishment, the stocks, the cat-o'-nine-tail, the Spanish boot, the Iron Maiden. Again and again across that continent, a collective holding of breath, a collective turning away from the inconsolable. In indigenous societies like those of Turtle Island before it became North America, like those of the Yoruba and Congo and Igbo and Fon before they became West Indians and North and South Americans, there were communal ceremonies, rituals, practices for the healing of the split, the fracture in a person or people when they got stuck, ways of diving under and resuscitating the drowned one in the unconscious and bringing them back to the whole. But the traumas inflicted on Africans and indigenous Americans by Europeans during the hundreds of years-long colonial project did two critical things. It criminalized all African and indigenous religions and practices and those human beings who enacted them, and it carried the European collective split forward. Africans and indigenous peoples of the so-called New World became targets of a vast unconscious shadow. The darkness Europeans carried with them, with us, which is to say, generations of unhealed trauma unleashed on the bodies of brown and black people. And if Europeans saw through the prism of their own collective psyche, Africans and indigenous peoples as dark, which is to say demonic, evil, they saw themselves as light. Light is godly, heavenly, we remember. Now the split has become its own reinforcing idea, taught by European priests and slave masters alike. by turning away from the inconsolable within themselves and criminalizing the very methods by which they might return, Europeans fashioned of unhealed wounds their new world. And here is what I know. If we do not understand that we have turned from the inconsolable, that we carry around inside of us a collective split that keeps on reproducing itself from generation to generation, and if our languages, our religions, our philosophies, our institutions of learning are all somehow shaped by this split that keeps us turning away from the inconsolable in our collective psyche, and if we keep holding down our unbreathing parts, refusing to waken to their chilling underwater cries, we become a danger not only to ourselves, but to others and to our living, breathing planet. August 2019. Another hurricane is poised in the northern Atlantic, headed towards my islands. I'm not at home. I'm in California, one eye on my Bahama land, the other on the fires up north, south, and east of us in the Bay Area. It has been year after year now that my partner and I wear N95 masks to protect our lungs from the smoke of wildfires that eat through forests, habitats, human neighborhoods, and homes across the western coast of the US. It is the summer of 2019, and the pandemic has not yet begun. We do not yet know that a virus will be loosed into the air and cross oceans to colonize our lungs, take up residence there, send millions across the planet into hospitals where they will mostly die alone, connected only to machines that try to help them breathe. We do not yet know that the quality of air will be changed again, but I have masks in my car and in the kitchen closet. Fire season and hurricane season are two realities on opposite sides of the stretch of earth, and I am keeping my eyes on both. My sister WhatsApps me an alert on August 30th, 5:44 a.m. Eastern Time. It is dark, and I am asleep, but I hear the thick vibration through layers of dreaming. I search for my phone. I squint. Dorian is forecast to become a major hurricane later today. A hurricane watch is now in effect for the islands of the Northwest Bahamas. At 5 a.m. EDT, the center of Hurricane Dorian was located about 338 miles east of San Salvador. San Salvador was the site of that other landfall, Christopher Columbus and his men and their 3 ships looking for India and gold, a now infamous error, an error that would eat its way through the bodies and lives of the Arawak living in these islands, eat its way through the bodies and lives of the Taino to the south, and Seminole and Cherokee and Mohawk and Apache, and so many more across the waters to the north on Turtle Island. Even eat through Earth herself is still eating. I think there used to be a difference between hurricanes and fires and colonialism, but in these times, I am no longer sure. The winds are only 105 miles per hour. We've seen ourselves clear of many hurricanes before this one. I have watched our street become a river, fish swimming in confusion towards the swamps, the sea, our submerged yards. By noon the following day, the Bahamas Department of Meteorology tells us Dorian's fury is aiming at the northwest. Maximum sustained winds have increased. Some strengthening is possible today. Some fluctuations in intensity are likely, but Dorian is expected to remain an extremely dangerous hurricane. I go to sleep that night, one eye on my dreams, the other on my phone, waiting for the next alert. At noon, September 1st, I read, Dorian becomes the strongest hurricane in modern records for the northwest Bahamas. A hurricane warning remains in effect for portions of the Northwest. We are a small country, 400,000 people, 85% of African descent, 12% of European descent, 3% Asian, 3% Latin American, live across 20 islands that lie cast across shallow seas as though a goddess had shaken stones like dice in her wide fist, then thrown them all at once into the water. They shimmer green and brown and white when the sun is high. My family live in Nassau and in Grand Bahama. I'm watching video clips on Facebook, flipping back and forth between the Weather Channel and ZNS, the broadcasting station of the Bahamas. The winds have turned deadly, now 185 miles per hour with gusts of 220. And the entire movement of the hurricane over land has slowed. I watch in horror as a massive spiraling white cloud sits over the Abacos and then Grand Bahama for days, moving at an unprecedented 1 mile per hour. Unleashing torrents of water from skies that cannot shelter. After an excruciating silence, we hear the stories emerge. How a woman, her husband, and her elderly mother hold onto the tops of kitchen cabinets as the water rises almost to the ceiling of their farmhouse here in Freeport. How a woman holds onto her mother to keep her from drowning. How in Abaco a man tries to hold onto his baby boy, but the rushing flood of water is too strong, rips the child from his arms. It will be many weeks later that we who are watching find out that the hardest hit were Haitian immigrants living in shanty towns across Abaco. We will find out that nearly 30,000 people are homeless and without jobs, and that the damages amount to a quarter of our GDP, 3.4 billion. We will find out that the death toll of 74 is not an accurate count, because amidst the ruins are the bodies that the government does not have the resources to locate. And years later, there will still be hundreds who are missing. Only 6 months into recovery, COVID-19 strikes. A country whose dead are still missing, whose homeless are still concerned with accessing safe housing and work and groceries, goes into lockdown. I don't have to tell you. May 2023. It was during my visit to Nassau a month after Dorian that I made my decision to come home. I had visited shelters, done hands-on healing work with survivors, and I knew then that I wanted to return, to bring home some of the healing tools I had learned to use in my 17 years away. I wonder now about the traumas left behind in the wake of Dorian, in the wake of a pandemic. I wonder how many people cannot take in a full breath. The earth seeks balance. Earth is a self-regulating system. Fires actually help burn through decayed material, turning old trees and dead leaves into space and fertile ground for new life. Hurricanes help regulate the Earth's biosphere. They move hot tropical air to cold Arctic climes and out into space. They oxygenate the oceans. They pull up nutrients from the ocean floor and spread them around. They break up swathes of bacterial matter. They help the oceans thrive. The hotter it gets, the more work they have to do, the stronger they need to be, the slower they move. Our bodies seek balance too. In the absence of communal ceremony and ritual and spiritual technologies that can help us heal trauma, illness of the mind and body ensue. What began as survival responses to trauma become cultural ways of thinking and being. The split colonization introduced becomes a mainstream consciousness that we don't even think about challenging, even though poverty, addiction, physical and sexual violence, PTSD, depression, and myriad chronic illnesses cause ongoing suffering here in the Bahamas and across the Caribbean and Americas. The split itself won't let us make that connection, but we are not lost. The body knows. We cannot turn from the inconsolable in us forever. I think about my breath. Fear, we are told, constricts the chest, makes breathing shallow. Fear of remembering what is unspeakable, fear of speaking what we know, fear of punishment, fear of death. By tuning into the body and our breath, we can hear the part of ourselves that is not breathing. That is a beginning. That opens us up to the next beginning, becoming aware of the longing in us for union with the unbreathing part of ourselves, the part that is heavy, heavy under the water, waiting to be found, waiting to be retrieved. This is, of course, the hardest part. We long for union, but we are afraid of seeing what we will see. This is why the old ways were communal. So we would not have to go into that dread sea alone, but go we must. The survivor on the bow of the boat must find a way to dive back down and resurrect the unbreathing one. No matter that she has been under the surface for 20 years, 40 or 400, the survivor has to find the courage to go back, find the shadow self, and breathe into her mouth something like the breath of life. Coax her gently back to the surface of the waves, bring her home. We need this homecoming as individuals and as communities. We need this homecoming to heal the wounds of slavery, of colonization, and the ongoing ways white supremacy continues to harm. But for those of us raised to think of ourselves as white, who have profited in some measure from whiteness and the privileges and access it affords, whether in the Bahamas, the Caribbean, or across the globe, to ignore the cries of "I can't breathe" below the surface of our collective psyche, as well as above, is not only dangerous, it is immoral. It is that killing ignorance that stands by while ancient forests and human beings burn. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. That was quite something as the spirit moves through. Our next speaker is Natino Thompson, and he is a gender and queer theorist, the organizer for Queer Resistance. He's in New Providence. He holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and Psychology from UB. And as a queer Bahamian, as a queer Afro-Bahamian writer, artist, and researcher, Natino firmly believes in challenging long-standing revered ideas and social norms as one of the first critical steps to changing the thinking of a people and their culture. In May of 2021, Natino obtained a Bachelor of Arts degree in History and Psychology from UB. Natino's research interests particularly focuses on gender and queer studies and a host of intersecting issues affecting oppressed and marginalized groups. Natino aims to provide language, epistemic and hermeneutical tools to marginalized and oppressed groups to help them resist and overcome their oppression. And the title of his presentation, I think, is Coloring the Archipelago Queer, a queer reading of the Bahamas. So, Natino, thank you.
So good morning, everyone. So this moment is kind of full circle for me because I remember my first conference was, I think, the democracy. I can't remember what it named, Dr. Bethel, but Dr. Ian Strawn was also the person in charge of that. And this project I actually started in a class with Dr. Bethel Bennett, and I was trying to rework it. It didn't really come out the way that I wanted to in the class, but maybe it'll come out today. All right, I just think that it's interesting how Helen was talking about these traumas, because my presentation, the underlying, what I'm talking about today is not the paper, it's how I'm writing the paper. And I'm doing that because I'm very meticulous when I'm writing. And I need you to understand how I'm doing it, because these are tools that I'm creating for queer people and queer Bahamians. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. But the whole gist of my paper, in reference to Helen, is that those traumas haunt us. That that queerness haunts Bahamian society, and I'm using that as the undergirding kind of theme. So the papers hopefully will give the feeling of there's a haunting presence beckoning us, as Helen would have talked about. So without further ado, I'll start. Gender ain't everything. These were the words of Franklin Wilson on May 9th, 2023, at a return to idealism. As a gender and queer theorist, that is someone whose work is produced through the lens of an analysis of gender and queerness and the way that they both function in Bahamian society, there is absolutely no way that I would not take umbrage to such a misogynistic and uninformed statement. Without gender as an epistemic resource, I would have no voice. I would be trapped. In fact, I was trapped for a very long time. And James Baldwin says that we are trapped in language. You see, for me, I don't have the privilege of uttering such a statement, especially since I live in a country that refuses to acknowledge my very own non-binary gendered existence. The problem is that gender is absolutely everything, not just for my work, but for my survival. Queer and other marginalized bodies are marked for violence in very particular ways in the Bahamas. The state does not protect queer and other marginalized bodies because those bodies are perceived as a threat to its established order. Knowing this means that everything I do, say, or create is ultimately about keeping me alive and able to fight another day. So my presentation is about memory. I started there at least. And the ways that memories haunt, right? The way that memories haunt our present circumstances. But ultimately, my work is about a call to Bahamians all over the archipelago to remember. To remember. Because I think that that's important. Remembering, the work of remembering is important. So, to my overview, I problematize the erasure of LGBTQ plus contribution to Bahamian society, and this allows me to ground my work historically, highlighting an either intentional or unintentional gap produced by the loud silence of generation of Afro-Bahamians. The second thing I will try to do is I'm going to focus on the queerness and how that haunts Bahamian society, right? I will reveal the haunting or how it works in Bahamian society. And then I will try to interrogate the official and supporting narratives of Bahamian society, and then determine or try to establish whether or not those narratives are coherent or incoherent. Erasure. Any attempt to reconstruct, record, or analyze Bahamian society that excludes marginalized people should be regarded as an ahistorical and revisionist account of Bahamian history. In other words, if you leave us out, that's not Bahamian history. What does it mean to be queer? And I wanted to, I'm going to do this or explain this because every time I act or every time I say that I'm queer, everyone keeps asking what that is. Bell Hooks describes queer as not about who you are having sex with. That can be a dimension of it, but queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it. It has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. To identify as queer, another scholar writes, means to be politically radical and in your face, to paradoxically demand recognition by straight culture, while at the same time rejecting this culture. Part of what is being rejected here are attempts to contain people through labeling. So queer is touted as an inclusive but not exclusive category, unlike straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual. Queerness is something ultimately beyond gender. It is an attitude, a way of responding that begins in a place not concerned with or limited by notions of binary opposition of male and female or homo versus hetero paradigm. Queerness has been set up to challenge and break apart conventional categories, not to become a category itself. Queerness is a quality related to any expression that can be marked as contra, non, or anti-straight. So one of the things that I talk about, or I often mention, or I say to people, is that the Bahamian history erases LGBTQ plus Bahamians, right? How? The 2022 census does not contain any information about queer Bahamians. It does not record us, and when I say us, it doesn't record intersex persons, for example, right? Intersex people are not going. You're not going to find any. Only if they identify as man or woman will they be recorded. And so, for me, as a non-binary person, there's no category for me to fit in because they don't have that there. And as a result, even though I'm living in this moment, technically, I would be absorbed into the category of man, which erases my gender. And that is how it's done, right? So the Department of Archives, to tell a story, I remember there was an archivist there and I was asking about some queer information. And she said to me, well, you know they don't have no information about us. I said, us? And that was a moment, I got very cool with her. That was a moment that she came out to me. That was how she did it. And then she told me the story that was like a couple months later, her and her partner was getting married. And then shortly after that, she left the Bahamas for Canada to seek asylum because of a situation. In healthcare, currently only the HIV and AIDS Center in their intake forms has the categories for us to identify. However, they erase us when they collate the statistics. I've talked to Dr. Nakia Forbes about that. We're working on that to get that sorted out, but yeah, and when you go to the education system, they don't record us there either. So there's a pattern. What I'm describing is a pattern of dysfunction or a pattern of erasure. And when you erase people, you silence us. You silence our pathways to cultivate our distinctly queer lives. So queer people have always existed in the Bahamas, but there are only about 6 pieces, I think, well, 6, it's going to be 6 now, but there are 5 pieces currently of queer Bahamian literature, academic. There are no information about our lives. So what I did was, while I was working as a researcher for Dr. Curry and Dr. Tinker on their project, I actually came across this case, which is the Queen versus Oscar Mackey and Arthur Sanders in 1970, right? So Arthur Sanders was born on September 6, 1933 in Mangrove Key, Andros. He got married in 1957 at the age of 23. To a 21-year-old Dorothy Ferguson on February, 21-year-old Dorothy Ferguson, sorry. Dorothy was born on February 15th, 1937 in Mangrove Key, Andros. Oscar Mackey was born on March 4th, 1939 in Wimsey Spidey, Lutheran. And I'm doing this because I'm grounding this historically, so you can't say to me, these people don't exist. Because every time I open my mouth to say something about being queer in the country, there's always this, that ain't us. That ain't happening here. You're trying to import something. You bring this from America. And what I'm trying to say to you is it's been here all along. It haunts our society because we refuse to talk about it. We refuse to acknowledge our existence. Right? So I found how I got to this. I was searching for, we were doing a project on the Dissident 8. And while I'm searching through the Nassau Guardian to look for, some information, I come across this headline that says, Buggery Duo draws sentence for 6 months. And the Buggery Duo was Arthur Sanders and Oscar Mackey. And this incident occurred the 13th of July, 1969. And I found this in the Nassau Guardian, I think it's the Nassau Guardian or the Tribune, one of those. in 1970. They got sentenced to 6 months. And so the story goes, Ivan Roll and Kirkland Wallace followed these two men home. And they looked, or they peeped outside the door hole. Oscar Mackey, alleged that they broke into his house and beat him up. Both Saunders and Mackey claimed that they were threatened by each other to have sex. But what I think is more interesting is what the judge wrote, or the judge said. The Chief Justice who presided over the case made the statement, "You may wonder why Roll and Wallace followed Mackey home and listened outside their door. No doubt it was because they hoped that there would be a bit of excitement. In Greencastle, Eleuthera, any bit of excitement is welcome." Those were the words of the Chief Justice. And this was printed in the newspaper. I mean, and then, so what has been erased is that kind of violent voyeurism. And I will confirm this because we were at a conference that was being held by social sciences, and Erin Green was talking, I think a couple days before I got here. And she talked about how people would literally be peeping through each other's house windows to see because that was the way that they determined, okay, well, we're going to report you to police and you're going to go ahead and get, you know? And so what I have to do more research on that, but what I'm seeing emerging is that besides the violence of silencing us, you also silence what you did to us in that time. And in that way, you can revise history and say, we've never done anything to y'all. In fact, that's what our government does all the time. There are no reports of human rights offenses by LGBTQ plus people in the Bahamas. We don't do those things there. And then when you come here, you break every human right possible. So the reason why I highlight that case is because, and watch this, that's not the only case. I also found some, and this again, I think speaks to it. I found some Bahamians who went on the contract, who were arrested in Miami for unnatural intercourse. So it wasn't just happening here. But this is the part of Bahamian history that we don't want to talk about, that we've shied away from. Okay, so what I did was with this, I want to show this. Yes, thank you. So I said the same thing I said to y'all about the census 2022 report. I took this to Twitter. And I want to note this one here in the right corner. Shut the F up, bae. We have a census for a reason. Every human in the house is accounted for, whether you use a fish or an effing giraffe. You need your own la-la land. God identify anything with a cock as a man. Now take it up with him. Right? That's the response. Another one was like, what an asshole. Thanks for the compliment, but okay. And then the one over there on the left bottom, so even though I made the statement, I guess they didn't want to attack me, or I don't know what it was, but they said, oh my goodness, shut the F up, please, you and your fat friend, annoying as F. So I have a friend, you know, and she didn't even say anything. She did not say anything. This was my fight. If you have a problem with anybody, you should have a problem with me. But, you know, that's the violence that I have to deal with on the daily, because I'm making these are true statements. They're uncomfortable, but they're true. And then the next one was up in the corner. That's a gay doctor Bahamian doctor, he was trying to trivialize the fact that I had made the comment. It was like, y'all fighting over or y'all arguing over the census when people dying. And I was like, but you could hold space for two of them at the same time, though. Like, I don't get it. And so, yeah, the issues that I often talk about, my modern straight society or hetero society, I think because we've internalized this garbage, and queer Bahamians often erase themselves just to make heteronormative people comfortable, you know? I'm not gonna do that, I'm sorry. So, I don't know if this is the thing out. Yes. So anyway, until we get this thing on, this is the clip where Cassius is asking me whether I have a penis or a vagina. And if you think that the voyeurism has gone away, no, it just shows up on national television for everyone to watch.
The only time that matters if we're going to bed, and unless you want to sleep with me, I'm not going to answer that question. So don't answer. Do not. Hold on. Listen to me.
The point I was just making is that. So the point I was making with that is, straight people or heteronormative people or heteronormative Bahamians only want to know, like, you only want to know what's happening with gay people for one purpose. You want to know where to put us. And so my advice to any heteronormative Bahamians is don't ask nobody if they have a penis or vagina, if you're trying to understand, because I'm going to get real disrespectful. Because I'm not doing that to you. We don't do that. We don't have that luxury. That's not the way it works. These are the actual birth records. And again, I'm doing this because you need to prove it. You have to have proof for because some people will not recognize it unless you have it. You know? So Guy Hawkwenham, which is like the central, he's a French philosopher. He says the problem of homosexuality hovers over society like a ghost or scarecrow. In spite of all the condemnation, the number of perverts seem to be on the increase. He also claims in his book, Homosexual Desire, he says the desire is neither heterosexual nor homosexual, properly speaking, right? Desire just is. He also makes the claim, which I love, is that capitalism manufactures homosexuals, right? And I think that's confirmed in the same way that capitalism manufactures proletariats, right? It's that same kind of conceptualization. But again, that's something I take up very in depth in the paper. It's still being written. I got 4 pages coherent, 44 incoherent. That's just how it is. So this is the main thrust of my paper. Like I said, queerness haunts Bahamian society. So you can turn this up, please. And we started, because I want them to hear this one, actually.
Somehow in the book. Do you not? I mean, do you believe in that? Do you believe that ancestors that you've not known can be still coming through us, working through us, and we retain some memory?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
You use a lot of memory from ancestors somehow in the book. Do you not? I mean, do you believe in that? Do you believe that ancestors that you've not known can be still coming through us, working through us, and we retain some memory
I do now.
of them? You do now?
I do now. My whole education, was to make sure I didn't believe things like that. And I dismissed all sorts of things that were indigenous in my family, superstition and, the discredited information, the discredited way of knowing that discredited people always have. But when I began to write, that was the place where I had to go. That's where the information was. That's where the images were. That's where the language, the color came in these tales, folk tales, attitudes, the normal, easy acceptance of signs. And then things began to happen that were really quite startling.
So again, I'm talking about I'm writing from place. That discovery, that she names it. When I found it, I was like, yes, that's the place I'm writing from. I'm writing using the memories of our ancestors that haunt us, their unrealized dreams, their longings, their passions, their yearnings, Maybe for freedom. Yes, for freedom. Definitely for freedom. Definitely to not be under certain circumstances. Because I always often think, okay, like what happens to those desires that my mom had while she was pregnant with me? You know, it's that kind of concept. What happens to those longings that are never actualized? How do we use those? Okay, my time up. I gotta go. But I'm using queerness as a means of conjuring these ghosts. That's what I'm doing, because queerness itself has been made invisible. So I'm using that to talk about intergenerational justice, silence, and trauma, the haunting as a disorientation, to understand and communicate this unknowable loss, right? And then to talk about the patterns of dysfunction or patterns of silence. We don't have all the time to go to this, but I think I'm going to end with this. I'm going to end with a quote from James Baldwin. He says, "What one does not remember dictates who one loves or fails to love. What one does not remember dictates actually whether one plays poker, pool, or chess. What one does not remember contains the key to one's tantrums or to one's poise. What one does not remember is the serpent in the garden of one's dreams. What one does not remember is the key to one's performance in the toilet or in the bed. What one does not remember contains the only hope, danger, trap, inexorability of love. Only love can help you recognize what you do not remember." Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Natino. I think we can open for questions. Yeah, you have a question?
Well, just an observation. I'm good. Okay, I got you. I got you the first time. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. My presentation, which I did not give holistically for obvious reasons, most of it came from this book, The Black Ghost of Empire, The Long Death of Slavery and the Failure of Emancipation. And as you were speaking, I referred back to this book, and in the introductory portion of the book, there's a section called The Ghost Line. And it says that W.E.B. Du Bois, the Pan-American philosopher, proposed in 1900 that the problem of the 20th century is the problem of the color line. Now, he goes further. The struggle for human rights, that's the author now speaking, the struggle for human rights and civil rights, and the intersection with the battle, for gender rights and environmental rights continue to be life and death issues of our times. Now, I need not say more. Obviously, the issue to which you speak is as broad and as bright as day, that something is missing. We have to recognize all those who live and work among us. There's no question about it. Whether you agree with what it is they practice or not, it has to be recognized, and not for punishment, but for the fact that they exist in the society. But the whole point of his piece here is that black people in general have suffered from the ghost line. Okay, I rest my case.
Thank you. Question?
More of a comment, sorry. Just a slight comment. The Buggery laws are a legacy of colonialism. It's throughout the region. The Bahamas is far advanced to all the rest of the region. Papa, Mr. Ingram, when he was Prime Minister, enacted legislation that made the Sanders and Mackey case history. So now under our law, couples can, of the same sex can have relations in private. anybody can have sex in their homes. So I think it's not to justify what has happened in the past, and not that we should forget it, but I think we need to recognize that unlike anywhere else in the region, because in Jamaica, Trinidad, and the rest of the region, it's still in the criminal offense to have sex in the privacy of your home. But in the Bahamas, we are at least that one step beyond. So I think we have come some way. I take your point, of the trauma that, we need to breathe, as the sister was saying, but at the same time, we need to acknowledge that we have come some way beyond the rest of the region on this point alone.
Could I respond to that? No, I'm not. I'm not giving you that. I'm not giving you a treat. No, because it's my life that's being affected while you get to go and enjoy yours. I'm not giving you that. I'm giving nobody that because it does nothing for me. So no, full stop.
Helen, in those exquisite words of yours, your beautiful words, it took me down into a meditative state, which was beautiful. But in those words, I found that I was invited to experience our consciousness embedded in the natural world. And I wondered whether you could elaborate on that framework, that notion that what happens in the natural world is somehow linked to the traumas that we carry. And the framework that you're working from, which allows you to articulate that. That's...
Oh, well, I appreciate the quote that you ended with from Toni Morrison. James Baldwin, and then also before that, Toni Morrison. And I appreciate the question that you just asked, Michael. I think, Toni Morrison talks about this place that she writes from that is connected to the ancestors, that's connected to spirit, I think, and to memory. And when I write, I'm very aware of consciousness in the earth as well. I'm writing something right now in which it was very clear to me that the traumas of slavery permeated the earth underneath where they took place. And what would happen if we think that way, that a trauma doesn't begin and end in the human body, but it affects the trees where people were hung, it affects the ground underneath, it affects and stays present in the earth where those things occurred. If that is true, and my experience tells me that it is in some way, then decolonization requires, that we look at how to heal consciousness on many levels. So I think about those things when you ask that question. What was the last part of your question, Michael? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
We have another question right here.
Hello, everybody. Okay, my question is for Ms., I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this right, Makeda Serju? Yes, so I was wondering, how do you think hair, texturism plays a role in colorism? Looser versus tighter patterns, bad hair versus good hair. In the Bahamas, we're very, picky about which natural hair should be worn versus which should be straightened or permed. So I was wondering if you could speak to that, please.
I would love to. Thank you for the question. I will start by saying your hair is very beautiful. And I do believe that is definitely a problem because me personally, I'm from, as you can tell, my last name doesn't sound very Bahamian, right? So my father is of Jamaican Indian descent, and my sister got the curlier, the wavier hair texture, whereas mine is kinkier. So growing up, I would always hear people tell her, and hers was longer, oh, you have good hair, I don't know what happened to your sister, and so on, so on, so on. But it's a problem. It's definitely a problem. And I think that the issue is that in the Bahamas, we continue to perpetuate this image of white supremacy. You guys mentioned it a few times. Whenever you go out, you always see people with the lace fronts. That's like, you have to have a lace front. You have to have these hairstyles that symbolizes like white people. It's only when you get into the later, later on now, where we're starting to appreciate natural hair. There was a whole incident with the public school where the girl was called unprofessional for wearing her natural hair, a puff, which is the same thing as a white person's ponytail. But they would never tell the white person with a ponytail, your hair looks unprofessional. So I think in the Bahamas, and I say this all the time to anyone who I can talk to, there's no such thing as good hair. Hair is hair. If your hair is a 4C or 4, if it's all the way coily, but you can't see no waves, that is still beautiful. Even if your hair is wavy, almost like, I don't want to say Conky Joe, because, hair is hair. It doesn't matter how wavy it is, how kinky or coily it is. And once we start to realize that there's no such thing as good hair or bad hair and stop using those terms and appreciate natural hair, that's when colorism will start to dissolve a bit. Not completely, but a bit.
I think we have a question right here, and then I think you do and you do, right? Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for all of your presentations. So Ellen, one of the things that you said in your presentation actually took me to Ms. Serju presentation, and you said for those of us who were raised to believe that we were white, and it caused me to think about, like, in the Bahamas, our white and black is very different. I don't know. But I was wondering in your research if definitions of whiteness came up. Like, what does it mean to be white in the Bahamas? Because I find that's even more of an interesting question. Like, who is white?
So what I'm finding is the main reason why I wanted to do the study is to bring awareness to Bahamians that there is a little bit of a minority. Like, whenever, let me speak for myself, whenever I would go into a classroom, I would be like one of the only light-skinned individuals. And that would result in me being called the white girl. Just like how in America, at least in the movies I've seen or scenarios, when there's only 1 or 2 black persons in the classroom, they call, that's the black child, right? So a lot of times I find that, and even in the responses, the people who had the lighter skin tones would say that they'd be called white, even though they weren't. Because me personally, I'm not white. But people would call me white, and that's when I get offended. And people who had if you had a white parent, they would not be offended. But me who does not have any white parents, but people are assuming that I do because of how I look, that's when it starts to get offensive. So in the Bahamas, we have a very interesting perception of what is white. So most times we don't even call people white, we call them Conky Joe, which is just a Bahamian white person. To some it's derogatory, to some it isn't. And that's interesting because even in the research, some people didn't mind being called yellow or red gal, other people's minds. So it's so fickle, you can't really, but to me, anyone who is white is someone who has straight hair and white features. I'm not gonna outright call you white, but that's what I think someone who is white is. But if you have a curly hair type, I don't think you're white.
Okay, this question.
Not a question so much. Oh, sorry.
So I was going, so even though I didn't get to finish, but even though my project is about queerness, it's about looking at Bahamian citizenship, Bahamian identity, Bahamian history, Bahamian society from a queer perspective, right? I didn't get to do that. So I am interrogating Bahamian identity and this whole idea of whiteness or color or race in particular. So M.G. Smith talks about 4 different categories. There's phenotypical color, which is the phenotypical color of an individual, which is simply his or her racial appearance. The genealogical color, the biological status of an individual as defined in terms of his purity or mixture of racial descent. And then there's associational color, right? And this is for, MG Smith is talking about racism or color, the way that we define color in the Caribbean, British Caribbean. This is why I think it's very necessary. So it's associational color. The associational color of an individual is simply the expression of his associational habits in terms of color of the person with whom he typically associates on terms of equality, familiarity, and intimacy. And then the last one, the last aspect of it is cultural and behavioral color. And that would be the extent to which an individual's behavior conforms to the norms associated with one or other hierarchical ranked cultural traditions of the society, as these norms themselves are associated with color differentiated groups. So there are 4 different aspects that MG Smith talks about. And I think that that's important when we're going to be discussing what is whiteness, what is blackness, and how the gradations happen. Okay?
I haven't spoken yet. Okay, just some comments, because I was taking some notes. You made a statement that gender does not matter. And you know what I thought about? Oh, I do not see color. When somebody tells me they don't see my color and I'm in the front of them, we have a problem. Okay? So don't tell me it doesn't matter, because it does matter. It determines your interaction with me.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that was why I took umbrage to it. There were people, there were women in the audience when that happened. But as usual, nobody says anything, right? Nobody checked him, because if I was on the stage, I would have checked him, right? I don't care how much money you have. I will check you, because it's a teachable moment. You don't say things like that when half of the population of the Bahamas is more, like, we know from the 22, the pre-statistics that women now outnumber men. So you can't say that. You just can't say it, because it's not true. But yeah, I agree.
And the other thing you stated that there are so many issues in the United States, in the Bahamas, and how is it possible for us not to see queer homosexualities when we look at our choirs in our churches? And this is something, and especially in the black church.
Come
and
through. Come through.
I'm talking, well, I'm from the United States, but I'm talking about what I see here. This is where, and you close your eyes to them. You see them on Sundays in the choir and whatever, and you just turn your head. Just comments making. No. When you talked about trauma being in non-humans, I'm thinking about strange fruit.
Yes.
I'm thinking about the popular tree.
Yes.
Whenever I hear those things now, I have the trauma within me. And I'm not even from the United States, but I know what it is. Mm-hmm. I'm fanning because I'm getting hot. Okay? You talk about how data and statistics. One of the things I did in the United States was you need to tell your stories. Mm-hmm. Stories matter. In our community, in our culture, it's not a written culture. Our culture is basically storytelling. That's how we know. Now, I did not live here for many years, and I missed out on so much history in my family because it's not written. Yeah. It's all stories. So when we have something, we need to counteract what the norm is with our stories, so it could give it a balance.
Yes.
That's it.
Well, to the point about them being in the church, LGBT plus people being in church, we're not only a church, right? The picture that I have up there, one of the things we don't talk about in Bahamian society is the contributions. So watch this. The gowns that y'all go to Miss Universe, y'all take Miss Universe Bahamas to, guess who they're made by? Alicia Seymour has made them, and there are other gay men. I can't call their names because some of them may not be out. But Alicia is an openly visible trans woman, and she has made dresses for Miss Universe Bahamas to go and represent the country. We have athletes, current athletes, who are. But we refuse to acknowledge that. In fact, when Jonquil Jones got up and talked about her discrimination by BTC, nobody wants to talk about that. We'll talk about Buddy Hield all day, though. But we refuse to talk about John Paul Jones, right? But the minute she gets married, we want to have her up in 242, whatever the Voice and Bahama Voice and all those places, because for queer people, we are entertainment, it seems. Like when I interact with people, it almost feels like, oh, you like me because you get to make me into caricature, right? You're never really dealing with, so one of the quotes, James Baldwin again, he says that you have to decide who you are and then force the world to deal with you, not its idea of you. So a lot of, so this demeanor itself, I'm like this because I have to be like this because I'm dealing with a particular set of people called Bahamians. And they don't understand that I will, watch this, you will not deal with the idea of me. I'm standing in front of you, deal with who I am here. On top of that, the other contributions that LGBTQ plus people make, the dances at Junkanoo, guess who's leading those, or who creating those dances, right? The guy who was in the picture, he's one of the dance leaders for the Saxons. And for years when I was growing up, everybody used to be talking about Jerry from the Valley Boys, used to be, who are them girls stepping on time? But nobody wants to talk about that. And then when we get to church, we just act like they don't exist. Never mind the fact that sometimes the LGBT plus people themselves, they erase themselves so that everybody else can be comfortable. Well, I ain't doing it. I'm not doing it. You have to deal with me and all my glory.
So my question is for Makeda. Hi. That's not like, okay, fair enough, I'll stand. So, question. The skin tone question that you had, you sort of intimated that, there would have been some error in it. I wouldn't pay that any mind if I were you. There'd be some error on all your questions, and so it will wash across the survey. Relax, you good. So as I was thinking about that, I missed really the part where you said, and I don't know if you said or not, so my question is, did you ask your respondents to identify a skin tone for themselves?
Yes, I did. So I had it numbered, and I asked them to select a number.
Beautiful.
But yeah, go ahead.
Because I'm going to suggest to you that maybe you look at the correlation between the identified skin color and their responses.
Right. So I did that, but it was hard to quantify it into the responses. So I found that, for example, a lot of the people who are answering the questions about the mixed individuals, like the first three, they would validate them and said, yes, they are black, but then they would add because of the hair type or because of the skin, the first girl had freckles. Because of her nose, she's black. Because of her skin tone, even though it's light, she's black. So they would validate, whereas the people who would fall into more of a median skin tone, they would just say, yes, they're black, just that. But the other ones who were like lighter skin tone, or mostly lighter skin tone, would be like, yes, because of. And that led me to think, maybe they're validating because they would want people to understand, yes, I am black because of that.
Yeah. I think also, I understand that, yes. And also you may want to look at it, I don't know if you looked at it with regard to the earlier case type questions as to whether those responses, do they correlate at all? So, interesting.
Thank you.
Right.
You're getting me fired. I'm firing myself.
Thank you very much. This is a question to the whole panel and a comment to Makeda. I just want to say that I imagine that once you had heard everybody's presentation. Oh, like where are you supposed to go? Put me somewhere. Right here? Oh, okay. So having heard the other two presentations, I would guess that you might want to, because you talked about colorism as being associated with places where blacks are in a minority, but having heard the other two presentations, our whole world is built on white standard. everything is built on white standard and it pervades everything. So I don't think colorism has anything to do with whether you're in a physical majority or not. But because of what you guys have said, the question I have is, so how do we heal? That's the question.
So when you talk about stories, I think that you have to have a coherent narrative to heal. So that's, if I were able to get through the presentation, I would have gotten there because the last part I was talking about was stories. Also, as I was doing my research, the only way that I can have a coherent story, or the way that I make up stories about my life is I rely on the narratives that you create, right? For example, my mother's story, I can't run away from my mother's story because my story is wrapped up in her story because she gave birth to me. And I need us to think like that. So one of the things I found is that incoherent stories are normally found in Alzheimer's and dementia patients. And to heal, you have to have a coherent narrative. And so I'm proposing in my paper that we need to rewrite Bahamian history because we got it wrong. It's incoherent, right? And I think we need to go back to the origin story of this whole white versus black thing. I'm challenging, and I'm using, I found the birth record of Roland Simonet. Roland Simonet was not white. But watch this, but we're not saying that in history books. The Bahamas has never been ruled or had a black person as never had a white person as leader. But yet we say that Lyndon Pinland was the first black premier. No, that's not right. He was not. Roland Simonet was the first black premier. He was the first black premier. And watch this, Brent, we need to tell him, baby, you ain't white. Hold up, we need to tell him that. No, because he been running, he's told him no. He's been, but yes, hold up. So he has but according to his father's birth certificate, it says mulatto. And so the issue here is he's been telling everybody you white, no baby, you mixed. Get it right. You're one of us. No, but watch this. That may seem like a small error, but watch this. In the paper I'm arguing, that pulls apart the whole history that the PLP has claimed to have because they've been claiming to fight against a white oligarchy. So my question now is, if Roland wasn't white, then that means who else wasn't white in the party? Because now it becomes, watch this, and then what we witness a light-skinned black person pass for white all those years. Watch this, which means that we have to reframe our narrative in order to heal. And so that's, if I had gotten to the end, that's where I was going with this, right? But yes, go ahead. You can tell us more.
Okay. I am a writer. I tell stories as well, and I believe in their power to heal us. And as you were speaking, Martino, I was thinking we also need to read the stories that we're most uncomfortable hearing. You know, we tend to gravitate towards the stories that we find easily compelling, but we need to resuscitate, we need to retrieve the stories that have been silenced, that have been buried, that we don't know about. We have to find them. In shamanism, in the ancient practice of shamanism, they talk about soul retrievals, that when you are injured, when you are traumatized, a part of your soul splits off. We can call that consciousness, we can call it part of your identity, however you want to think about it, but it goes away. You're no longer conscious of it, right? And I see the traumas related to, to us as queer people, to people, to the traumas around slavery, the traumas that Europeans may have, experienced and then brought to the so-called New World and perpetuated on others. I see all of those as histories that are fractured and that require retrieval. And telling the stories. That's what we're doing at this conference too, retrieving, right? And so we need to find the stories that we don't know, and we need to hear them and immerse ourselves in them, especially when they're uncomfortable. You know, I think a lot about the fact that even, you know, in the first 100 years of 100 AD, 200 AD, when we were moving from polytheistic religious traditions to monotheistic ones, you could go to jail if your neighbor saw you worshiping your, you know, your gods, right? Or practicing in ways that the monotheistic traditions did not agree with. I was reminded of that when you talked about the voyeurism, you know, that you could tell on your neighbor for not being right, not being straight, not being what the society has said you're supposed to be. So that continues. I think that a great deal was lost in the transfer from polytheistic traditions to monotheistic ones. I think there's great value in the monotheistic ones too. But, you know, when I think about soul retrieval in a collective way, I think about the African religions and traditions that got lost, you know, during slavery, during plantation systems, that people could be murdered if they were known to be healers and have that kind of wisdom. So what happened to that wisdom? That is something that needs to be retrieved. And I know people are doing that, and scholars are retrieving it, and there's a lot of work around that. As a Greek Bahamian, I have done that work myself as well. What are the old ways that I need to retrieve that do not embrace and continue to uphold white supremacist consciousness? That is how we heal, by refusing to embrace anything that, you know, that white supremacist consciousness said is the way, right? And it's, you know, Toni Morrison said, how do you see it when it's all around you, right? But finding it, identifying it, and saying no, and then raising up some of the old ways and creating new ways and new stories that we can live by, because the white supremacist story, we cannot live by. It hurts everybody, and we have to say no, full stop.
So, in regards to colorism, I think the two main ways that we can mitigate it is acceptance and respect. At least growing up for me, my mother is a darker skin tone than myself, and the only way that I'm able to stand firm in my identity as a black woman is because she told me that, you know, you tell people you black, but you're just the lighter version, very lighter version. So I had someone reaffirming me of that, because when I would go to school, they would constantly tell me I'm the white girl, you know, and if you don't have someone telling you that, you're gonna eventually believe it. And that's what leads to the identity confusion at the end of the day. So I feel as though, and by all means, my study was not to mitigate the struggles that dark-skinned Bahamians go through, because there has been a trend of mistreatment of darker-skinned individuals just because they're dark-skinned. But I think that in order to heal, we need to understand and accept that the beauty standard does not cater to dark-skinned individuals, and we need to make a space for that. We need to stop feeding into this view that mixed or light-skinned people are beautiful, because dark-skinned people are beautiful. And I think that in regards to light-skinned individuals, we need to respect that their identity as a mixed individual and not a white person. Now, if you're white, you're white. If you're black, you're black. But if you're light-skinned and people are calling you white, that's a whole ballgame, different ballgame.
That's a whole level of violence.
Yes, so just respect people.